الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه أجمعين أما بعد. The state of Oklahoma and the Christians will not stop at Oklahoma. They have 49 other states and Puerto Rico mandated that the teachers are required to teach the Bible to the students at public schools. Here is another suggestion, because there are two segments that comprise the Holy Bible. First segment, the Old Testament. Both the Jews and the Christians believe the Old Testament to be the literal Word of God. The second segment, only the Christians believe that it is the literal Word of God. Since the Old Testament is agreed upon, متفق عليه, between the Jews and the Christians, I'm going to choose segments from the Old Testament for the teachers to teach. Who are you to decide what to teach? This is all the literal Word of God. Another lesson. Boys and girls, listen. There is an old Arab saying that goes like this. إياك أعني واسمعي يا جارة. I really mean you, but my neighbor hear what I'm saying. Boys and girls, Muslim parents, here is a part of the Old Testament. 1 Samuel chapter 15 verses 1 to 4. Muslim parents, you might have to buy a copy of the Bible now so that your children can review for the class. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites, Amalek, for what they did to Israel when they ambushed them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Boys and girls, Muslim parents, there's a lot more to come. This is only our second class to suggest to the teachers what to teach to their children at school. You see, public schools here, the children go to public schools to learn everything except math, science, reading, history, geography, biology. Don't forget the biology, because the old biology stuff was biology. Today it's a feeling. But they are going to learn everything other than these subjects, including every sin adults commit and practice. Why don't you think about the religion of your children, Muslim parents? You will be asked about them when you meet Allah. You can't escape that. Why don't you send your children to Islamic schools, even though Islamic schools are not up to the standard we wish for them, but at least they're not going to learn this stuff? Or better, let them study at home. Why? Because the wife can't stand the children you both raised. They're noisy, they're rude, they're fighting all the time. Send them to public schools to save money, so you don't have to pay Islamic schools. Save your children better than money. I have 3 things to say here. Number 1, Netanyahu mentioned a segment of the Old Testament that people said he was meaning Amalekites, the Amalek. You know who the Amalek is? The Amalek are the Palestinians. He mentioned that, we do to them what they claim it's Deuteronomy. Who cares? It's the same thing, same commandment. Put to death men and women, children and infants. Also, they mention sucklings in other parts. Cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. In other parts, they say asses. فيها قولين, 2 statements about it. Asses or donkeys. Sucklings, it's not in this particular one, but so he mentioned that. And therefore, the Jews of Israel, they're just good students of the Old Testament. They know the Old Testament. They wrote it with their own hands over the span of thousands of years. Number 1. Therefore, they're just doing what the Lord commanded them to do to the human beings who are men, women, children, infants. Now, about the cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys, listen. Cattle, sheep, camels, they're not people, so because, the people are of no significance to the believers in the Old Testament. Cattle and sheep, camels, we can eat them, you can ride them, you can carry stuff on them. Donkeys, we can't eat them. I hope people know that you can't eat donkeys or asses, depend on your state of mind at the time of thinking about this topic. Donkeys are very useful animals. You can do things with them. You can carry stuff on them. Do you know that all 4 Gospels in the New Testament, which only the Christians believe is the literal word of God, the Jews, they don't believe in it. They report that when Jesus, whom the Jews call a bastard and his mother a whore, that when he started his ministry, whatever that means, Jesus came to Jerusalem riding a donkey. Could it be that the Jews of thousands of years before the coming of Jesus were anticipating the coming of Jesus, and therefore they were saying, let's kill donkeys so that when Jesus comes, he can't find a donkey to ride to Jerusalem? Could it be? Number 3, 200,000 foot soldiers, 10,000 from Judah, 210,000 soldiers. This is thousands of years ago. Palestine was as tiny at that time as it is today in land and population. But the children of Israel had 210,000 soldiers. I don't think China or India at the time, thousands of years ago, had 200,000 and 10,000 soldiers. Israel. Wow. They could have invaded the East all the way to China. 200,000 soldiers. This is what they're going to teach your children. The worst of it is put to death men and women, children and infants. Is it possible that when your children, Muslim parents, are watching the news at night and they mention what the Jews are doing to the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and then they're studying this stuff at school, and maybe at home they will say, oh, let me read the whole book, maybe, since it's coming in the next classes, that they hear all this killing, destruction of Palestinian men, women, children, infants, cattle, sheep, camels, donkeys, and anything else that moves. Could it be that your children will tell you, hey, They're just, doing what the Lord told them to do in the Old Testament, the literal word of God. Muslims, when will you wake up? Oh, Allah help us.